Grindstaff. Mr. Grindstaff has been on the road and also ill for part of last week, but he's been traveling around speaking throughout Southern California. So if he looks slightly refreshed, that is part of the explanation.
I don't feel slightly refreshed. Okay.
He's slightly flushed.
Oh, Joe, wait a minute. I'm sorry. One other thing. On your desk is a little folder. And this is something, Aaron Farber, you know, is our executive fellow and has been staying on for this year to help us with material. And he and I have been fiddling around with charts. You'll recognize many of them because they're in the Delta plan. But this is kind of a short compendium I put together, or Aaron put together for me. And I used it at the California Law and Water Policy conference in San Francisco last week, and part of these were used at an almond growers or referenced in an almond growers presentation in Modesto. A month ago, Randy? I think it was a month ago.
Yeah, and for those of you that don't recognize the name almond, it was an almond conference.
That's what. Thank you.
Mr. Fiorini, who has on occasion, by repute, grown either almonds or almonds, had told me that there's a rule. He says, where you grow it, it's almonds. Where you talk about it, it's almonds. And occasionally he gets caught in that, too. But they treated me very nicely, and I had a good time. So anyway, this is, I think this is posted on our website now. I'm not sure. And we're testing this out, so you can take a look at it. Joe.
Yes, let's go ahead and get started with a legislative report. Kurt, we have included a couple of letters. As you'll recall, we actually have a policy about positions on legislation, and so I'll let Kurt talk about what we did.
Mr. Miller.
Good morning, members. Let's cover the Hoover, or wrap up the Hoover discussion just quickly. When the governor submitted the plan to the commission on the 30th, a 30-day clock started running where 30 days has to pass before the plan gets over to the legislature. So starting May 1st, and any time thereafter, the governor can submit the plan there. Whenever that date arrives, within 30 days of that date, the commission files their comments on the plan, and they will they traditionally write a nice report with comments on each section of the plan and publish it and send that also over to the legislature. And the legislature then takes whatever version of the plan is in legislative council ready form to their one policy committee on each side, and then if that's, it could stop right there and say no further action required. If it goes to the floor, there could be a vote to say nay on the plan. We'll see how that plays out. On legislation that Joe mentioned, and in your packets, there were 2 letters sent this week from the chair and co-chair on 2 bills of concern to us. The first is on AB 1871 by Mr. Logue. His bill had proposed that to prohibit the council from adopting a Delta plan until the BDCP plan is finished. The author pulled that bill the day before the hearing, so unless it's heard before tomorrow when the policy committee deadline arrives, the bill is dead for the year. Another bill of concern we wrote a letter on, AB 2000 by Ms. Huber, had several features in it, most of them relating to the Department of Water Resources. However, nestled in between the 2 pieces for DWR was a proposal to replace 2 of the governor's appointees to this council with 2 members from the Delta Protection Commission. The committee spent most of the time discussing the DWR components, one of which involved amending the memorandum of agreement between DWR and the BDCP process. That got somewhat spirited and interesting, and in the end, the committee held the bill, which means it did not get enough votes to pass out of committee, and it will be dead for the year if it is not acted upon before tomorrow's deadline. One bill that went out of that committee, Mr. Berryhill's AB 2421, proposes that a third party will do a cost-benefit analysis on any conveyance facility or project recommended in the BDCP when it's completed. That bill went out without amendment. I think there's a clause or there's a condition that it's subject to available funds in order to pay for the assessment. But anyways, off it goes to Appropriations Committee, next stop in the Assembly. And finally, a bill we've talked about before, Ms. Wolk's Senate bill regarding exemption from covered actions, particularly to the Port of Stockton. That bill is in the Senate Appropriations Committee as it moved out of policy 2 weeks ago. We'll keep an eye on that bill and keep you informed as it progress along the way. It's the only extant bill remaining in the process that directly affects any of the statutes regarding the Delta Reform Act or the Council. And for now, we'll keep track of it and keep you apprised of its progress. I'd like to say just a couple of things about let's go with one more point. The May revision will be released next month by the governor.
May revision of the budget.
Yes, of the budget. Normally involves caseload changes for programs dependent on are population-driven, usually health and welfare programs and education. The last few years, it's been subsumed by the discussion around the general fund condition. This morning's press indicated that the $9.2 billion cash deficit will probably slide past $10 billion by next month when the report is released. During the May revision process, the Council has one finance letter pending before the budget committees, and it involves extending limited term positions for our science program. This is I believe, a pro forma proposal inasmuch as the committees have already approved the funding for the positions, but on a technical basis, we will extend the bodies to fill the funding for 2 years for the science program. They involve 6 positions. That completes the things I wanted to cover this morning.
Okay. Questions? Hank? Okay. Thank you, Kurt.
Welcome.
Mr. Chair, just a question.
Go on.
Yeah, just on one of the bills, SB 1146, on the reports, it relates to wells and I guess well logs and information submitted to.
Ms. Pavley's bill?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
What's the status of that, Kurt?
Appropriations Committee, Senate Appropriations.
Okay.
Don, is your mic?
Is my mic on?
There
I
you
think
go.
so.
Yeah, just keep close. That's good. Thank you.
So that's an appropriation. So it's working its way through the process.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was just curious. I know that information has to be filed with your local environmental management department as well, and that I didn't know that we were prohibited from making that public. I knew there were some restrictions on that, and I guess the Department of Water Resources, as I currently understand, just a summary here, it is prohibited from making that available. So the well logs and the well reports are really not public documents under current law. Is that the case?
That's the interpretation from DWR Council.
Okay. Thanks.
I want to add to that. It depends on where the well logs are kept. So in some cases, counties, for example, maintain those, and they are public information in most cases where they're maintained by the county. But at DWR is where they are not public information.
That's interesting because I got my familiarity with which isn't great, but I thought they were available. You have to go; they don't just send them out to anybody, but you can go in there and review the well logs at the county offices which are held. But DWR has a different regimen that it has to adhere to.
Okay. And they have different laws that apply to them.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Grindstaff.
I'm going to go to Chris, and then I'll go to all the letters that we have.
Okay. Our legal report.
Is it on now?
We're trying. Yes. The nod is yes.
The nod is yes.
Get it close to you, please.
Thank you. With your permission, the board's permission, because of scheduling challenges, I'd like to use the time that I normally take for the legal update to give you an update on the EIR process that was going to take place as part of the Delta Plan agenda item later on, but Gwen Buchholz is here, and
Ms. Buchholz,
she has to catch a flight in a few hours. So,
all right.
With your permission.
Let's do that. Gwen?
Good morning. So we'd like to talk about item 8A. And when Jim, Andrew, and I were here last time, we were asked to come back with some more more quantitative analysis of the comments that we've received in the EIR process. Let me just, as you're looking for this piece of paper, there's a table on 8A. Overall, on the EIR...
8A.
8A. Yes, I'm sorry.
It's a 3 or 4 page document, various
Mine's black and
purple,
white.
mauve, and blueprint.
Yeah, mine's black and white. I apologize. You have to walk to the other end of the office to get a color print in my office. Overall, we received, just as a background, we've talked about before, we received over 200 emails, comment letters, comment cards, individual people providing comments at the hearings. And when we delineated the comments in the process, we ended up with 3,865 comments. And most of these basically were allocated into categories that were similar to the chapters in the EIR, so water resources, biology, that type. We received 417 comments that were delineated as comments that didn't address specific items in the EIR, were not addressed to the proposed project description in the EIR per se, but were added on to the comment letters that were really an opportunity for the commentors to talk about the 5th staff draft Delta Plan. And that's what we've separated these out into.
So these are the compendium of, or representative or something, of the comments that you think are really directed at the Delta Plan itself, not the EIR?
Yes.
Okay.
And some of them would actually be very clear about it. After discussing the EIR or prior to that, they would say, and now these are comments on the Delta Plan. Mm-hmm. And most of those were pretty clear about that. And we shared those with staff that were working on the Delta Plan so that this would be open for them to see the comments too. So this isn't a new piece of information provided to Delta Stewardship Council staff. What we've done on this is that we've categorized these into the 15 categories and 34 themes. So the comment categories, we further defined them as such as on the first page, the estuary protection and restoration. And then the themes were basically themes of the comments that we received. This table also has the number of commentors, or the number of comments we delineated for that area, and the number of commentors. You'll see on the first page as an example, we had one form letter that was submitted by one group, and
That's Friends of the River.
And Friends of the River was the initial author of that letter. You could pick it up on the website, and people submitted that letter, and it had It had 3 to 4, I can now remember it's 3 or 4 main comments in it, and then people would take that letter and actually add additional comments sometimes. But we had 77 letters that were based upon that Friends of the River.
How long was the basic document itself?
Basic document, boy. I'm so used to now dealing with comments by comments, Phil. Excuse me, Chair Eisenberg.
Well, the only reason I say that, I know from the very first summary you gave us, there were 10 organizations who submitted more than 100 pages.
This was not a large one.
It was not, yeah. I mean, my memory is something like 2 to 4 pages.
That's my memory, too.
Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes, no, this was not. We did have others that were 500 to 600 pages because of backup information, and this was not one of those.
Right, okay.
When?
Yes.
Just a kind of a
Get closer to your mic, please.
preliminary matter. Why is this relevant in the process now for the board to get this kind of information? And maybe an example of what an EIR type comment is, as opposed to what you're presenting here, which is basically this compendium of comments that are really focused on the Delta Plan. They're not.
Right.
So why don't you distinguish between those, and then why are we bringing this to their attention now?
Absolutely, sorry. So one of these things were different, and we were asked as we came back from last meeting, is to provide the council information on making decisions associated with the policies, the recommendations, the format of the next staff draft Delta plan. What were some of the comments? You've received multi-page summaries of the comments that were submitted directly to council as a Delta plan comment, and these were additive to those. They're different in the sense than what we look at as a comment on the EIR or a comment on the CEQA process. So the CEQA process would basically be talking about, we received numerous comments on our existing conditions, either level of detail, additional information, that type of that thought was relevant for that. We also received, in a CEQA concept, they might talk about the difference on how we would look at the impact assessment and what we were comparing an alternative or the proposed project to on the baseline, and what was the baseline. And the baseline in the CEQA document is existing conditions. And what was the level of detail, what was the level of analysis, and the interactions, or the cumulative analysis of the project with other projects. That's what we look at in the CEQA analysis. This was specifically more associated with what would the policies and recommendations be addressing in the Delta plan, and what type of focus that they could look at. So that if we look at, yes, there are page numbers, very small page numbers on the right-hand side. You can look at the major themes. Let us go to the page 3. At the top of page 3, where we talk about the Delta. We had many comments that believe that the Delta plan, just like as the other comments that came in directly to Delta Stewardship Council, talked about the focus of the Delta plan on overlay regulation, looking at it as a potential overlap with local authority, and the need for better definition of the roles of the local agencies, regional agencies, and state agencies, and the Delta Stewardship Council. That would not be a CEQA issue that we would look at in CEQA. So there's an example of something that's specific associated with the policies and recommendations and the approach.
Do you have I went through this chart, mm-hmm. and I've read a bunch. I'm not sure if I've read each and every letter that you're referencing in here, but I've read a lot of them. Nothing jumped out at me as something never before suggested to the council. You've read all this stuff carefully, and what's your general?
That is true, and as we've said before, we did not see, any new information that hasn't been provided in this category. It hasn't been provided in other comments to the council. I think maybe you could look at the number of comments as a focus, but at this point, no, we did not see. There was no surprises, no new information.
One of the things, I believe I remember this correctly, the Friends of the River letter wanted the council to set flow standards they thought served the public interest, but they did not provide any legal authority for the council to do that, and our staff has questioned whether the Act does, and that's the kind of stuff I'm looking for. And I again, on that letter, I just don't remember it. I could be wrong, but I just don't remember it.
And I apologize. I do not remember that specific letter at this.
Mr. Chair,
Don.
Just to follow on. So you were just speaking that category. So or were you talking in holistic terms that there were no new comments in any category? Or you just were talking about that category we were just talking about? I did.
Because I think this is my personal opinion.
Yeah,
because of the timing of the receipt of comments on the draft program EIR, was several months after the publication of the 5th staff draft Delta plan, that there appeared to be a much more of a inclusion of comments that had been previously submitted to the council on 5th staff draft Delta plan to be included with the comments on the EIR, because the 5th staff draft Delta plan became the proposed project. And so I believe that the comments that were submitted and said, and these are the comments on the Delta plan, many of those letters would also say, we have previously submitted these comments. And that was how we categorized these comments in this category.
Oh, in that category, but I mean, you got a number of categories.
We have a
coming
number
up
of
through.
categories.
That's why I just want to be clear about, 'cause
Right.
that was the one you'd taken us to on page 3. Phil was asking
This-
about that. I want to be clear that
This entire categorization, the
Oh,
417,
so in all the categories.
yeah,
you're saying.
this entire is a category of
Well-
comments that we did on the draft program EIR,
Out of the
3,865.
3,000 individualized comments to discrete elements, you've pulled out 470 that you think are directed only at the Delta plan, not
Right.
at the EIR. And you're only talking to us now about those
Yes.
extracted
But
470.
the 400.
Yes.
So the additional 3,300 comments, there may have been new information in that. You haven't got to that. I'm trying to follow you. 'Cause
Okay.
And I want to be clear. So, okay, so just with the 400 and something that you extracted that related more to the Delta plan, there wasn't anything new in that body of information that hadn't been said or commented on before, at least in your interpretation.
Right, and I believe,
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And distinguishing between the two, for instance, if it was an EIR comment that we're not talking about here, and just to make up a hypothetical, if the analysis didn't go far enough, it wasn't comprehensive enough with regard to some aspect of the
Right.
proposed project and some biological resource, the fix would be when you do the final EIR, you go back and fix that analysis. But I think what Gwen's saying is for the comments that she's seen and that we've seen that focus primarily on the Delta plan, you have, as a body, have already seen those comments in other forms, as has the staff, and we've already talked about those and are building any changes into the 6th staff draft already. So there aren't any surprises that we see in this body of comments. With regard to the EIR comments, there'll be some technical fixes, obviously, in the final EIR. Is that
yes,
relatively accurate?
yes, and I didn't mean to say that there weren't comments that we received on the draft program EIR that are not going to result in some modifications of text in the final EIR.
Okay, Mr. Chair, if I just ask one other question then. So at the end of this presentation or somewhere, then you're going to kind of tell us where that leads us relative to recirculation or not? Was that the intent here?
Well, I think that we've talked generally about recirculation, and I think that the plan, at least at this point, is first to get out a final staff draft.
Sixth draft.
Sixth draft. We've got to present that to this body to make sure that we've got it right, that we've incorporated all the direction that we've gotten from this council. And then once we've settled on the draft and you say, yeah, this is pretty much what we want to see, we'll advise you as to whether or not we think recirculation is necessary. And I think that we've already said that given the nature of changes, it's likely, and I think that that's still the case. And we'll talk more about the concurrent processes. If we do recirculation, it'll be concurrent with the OAL process. So we're not there yet. I think, as Joe will talk about the schedule probably, but the first thing is we've got to get a staff draft, a final 6th staff draft out to you.
Yeah.
Soon.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand kind of the order of where comments fit in, and then recrafting documents, and then the decision points at which we will get to making those decisions. So that helps. Thanks.
Gwen, I suspect that the summary of comments on the Delta plan that were contained in the EIR comments is going to be should be part of the official record we have of this proceeding. Just a suggestion. When I picked it up and I went through this, I didn't understand the logic of the order, and then somebody explained to me they're organized by number of comments, which is odd because the first one, of course, is a form letter that's duplicated by members of an organization. I don't know whether it makes any sense to organize this by chapters. I mean, there's just something about the fact that the stuff you'd been doing before on the Delta plan where you were organizing by chapters, and when they cross-cut chapters, you make a notation. Just seems to me that would be a form to follow. And I do understand how complicated it is to take all those pages and try to translate it into simple English. So that'd be a suggestion anyway. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Mr. Stevens, you're through? Okay. Gwen, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's true. Okay. Thank you. This is the Gwen chart. Yes, that is my colors.
Ms. Buckholz, thank you very much for coming this morning. We
Thank
understand
you.
you're
Thank
flying
you
out. Appreciate it.
Yes, I apologize for that. It was an appointment
Okay.
I made months ago.
I understand. Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Johnston. Okay, Mr. Grindstaff, back to your report.
Yes. And I'm going to go ahead and start talking about the letters that we have, and I'm going to go in the order that they are on the agenda. So,
Members, go to file item number 7.
it's 4.
Is it 4?
It's still executive officers report.
Oh, right. I'm
and if you
sorry.
go
Excuse me.
behind the-
Excuse me.
The salmon colored, I guess that's a salmon colored page there. We have
After in my book, a goldenrod piece of paper,
Goldenrod,
you flip it over
okay.
and there appears an April 18th letter from the council to the Department of Water Resources.
Yes. As you'll recall, we've been asked as a responsible agency to make comments on the administrative draft documents that were posted on the web at the end of February. And that's normally a process that would be handled privately. However, in the discussion here at the council meeting, you asked that we actually make public our comments. And so we've done that here. Understand that where BDCP is at is this is a preliminary administrative draft. And so they've done a great job. There are more than 10,000 pages of documents on the web. It gives us something to actually look at and make comments on. So it's real progress, and it's hard work. They've really made significant progress. It's really important. So in looking at that, we used our consultant, Arcadis. As you'll recall, we hired Arcadis. They actually came back to us with a list of proposed comments, and those are attached here in the attachment. And most of these are relatively non-controversial.
Which ones aren't?
I was going to get to, there's probably one that's relatively controversial. On the third page of or page 5.
Page 5 of the letter.
Of the letter that we have to Russ Stein at DWR. At the bottom of the page, a staged implementation. Our consultants felt very strongly that we needed to say something about this because they didn't see it anywhere in the documents. It is something that's been discussed a lot with lots and lots of people over the years in public and private settings. And what a staged implementation might mean is how you actually implement the plan over time. And so that makes people nervous because potentially it's building part of the project and then building the rest of the project. It's a significant comment for us to say. I actually had, before we wrote it, I'll be honest, I talked to the people at BDCP, I talked to the principals there about the fact that our consultants thought it was really important that we say this, and we wanted to put it on the record. And so we talked with them about this quite a bit. I think it is important to actually say that's something that that is important to evaluate. I think the rest of it, certainly it's important. It's all important there. But it's fairly straightforward. The kinds of things you would expect to see in an EIR. That's the one that may trigger people being nervous.
Does that fall under the general nomenclature of something that everybody talks about in private but doesn't want talked about publicly?
I think probably. It is.
That's right. Yeah, as you know, I thought that was the most important comment you made, because it reflects, based on my knowledge, exactly what people are talking about privately, but they hate to have it said publicly for a whole host of tactical reasons. I thought it was quite important.
The second letter was, after much discussion, the letter to the... Oh, go ahead.
Going back to the page 5, the staging
Yes.
comments or whatever, was the concern that it was controversial, or was the concern that they needed clarification more on the language or the concept?
Okay. The concept isn't discussed in the draft documents that are out
In the draft BDCP
in the draft
documents.
that's out there today. And so the concern was that it ought to be addressed in the documents, that people ought to analyze that and consider that.
Well, in our first letter to BDCP in 2010, we said they ought to do a wide evaluation of sizing of facilities.
Well, and they are doing.
But at that time, they were not. You recall that was the time the Planning and Conservation League had just come out with a 3,000 cubic foot per second measure, and BDCP had not said anything about that.
That's true.
They
and
have
significantly added a
that.
number of alternatives, and they're doing a wide variety of alternatives. And what happened is our consultant said, we think the alternatives are really good, but we think how you implement the alternatives is important. So, for example, if you're building a big facility, maybe you implement it in stages, and that's why we called it a staged implementation. And our consultants felt that it was important that when you look at doing the project, you look at it that way.
So this is something different that they would...
This is something that is different. It is something that is, the chair says, has been discussed for a long time. I talked to Greg Zlotnick, and he said, well, we were discussing this back when I was sitting at BDCP.
And he was 10 years old at that time, right?
Probably. So it is something that has been discussed and is actually being suggested by some of the other agencies in more private settings, if you will. So, but we're saying it on the record.
Thank you.
Pat? No? Okay. All right. Next letter.
Next letter. The State Board letter, and we had a significant discussion about this letter, as you know, at our last council meeting, and I think we did a lot here to try and explain that what the council is not looking for is something that just implements flows based on unimpaired flows without regard to all of the impacts on everything else, but actually a balanced, realistic, I think we actually inserted the word realistic in here, flow regime that we thought could be a part of this holistic approach to looking at what we need to do in the watershed. So, and our thoughts were to try and convey that as part of this holistic way of doing it, and to try and also talk about how we should do this with regard to stakeholders, making sure that stakeholders are engaged and involved. I know the words are really something that people worry about. So Mark was telling me before the meeting that people were worried about the language, one sentence on page 3 of this letter. At the top of the page, actually the first line there, it says, until large-scale restorations in place, a realistic, more natural flow regime should be used to protect, restore, and enhance the system. And I think our point was, State Board, you need to put in place stuff that works now until BDCP gets in place. Not that flows are the only thing, and so, but people are very sensitive to the language here. We tried to be very careful with what we did, and in fact, we attached to the letter this summary one-page document at the end, more natural functional flow, because the goal is not just to have more flow for the purpose of flow. The goal is to have flows that actually provide the functionality that's necessary for the ecosystem moving ahead, and to do it in this holistic, balanced way that includes all of the issues that need to be addressed. So I recognize that it's difficult for the state board. I saw one of the state board members yesterday and commiserated with her about the challenge that they have in actually trying to balance all of the needs. And it's not a simple thing that they're going to have to do. They have to balance between the needs of the commercial fishermen, the needs of agriculture in the Delta, the needs for water exports. They have to balance all of those things, and that will be a challenge moving ahead. But we think that what we did was constructive and consistent with what the council has given us direction to do in the past.
Gloria?
Yeah. Page 2, item 4.
Page 2, item 4.
One of the concerns I heard from Mark or someone out there is that this part is kind of contradictory to the page 5 statement, page 3 statement.
Yeah, and I don't think it is contradictory. It's all in how you read it. So if you want to think, if your assumption, the way we wrote it, the way we intended it to be read was you need to do it in a holistic way, consistent with the National Science Foundation, but you need to get on with, we want you to do flows, and they need to be realistic, but we didn't want to say anything that contradicted this. So that's exactly the challenge we face is saying things clearly, but,
Right.
but facing the fact that people are always nervous about their interests.
I think you made a good point about the language, how it's presented. So, and I think a lot of the concerns really are clarifications rather than so much concerns, just making sure the language is understood in the document.
As you recall, at the last meeting, we talked about this letter going out and agreed at that time that Randy and I would review the letter, and we saw, 2, 3 versions of it before it went out, and the normal thing. And I said, do it this way, and Randy said, do it that way, and Joe said, do it this way. This seemed to be a plausible argument, responsible way to do it, and consistent with our other written comments on BDCP, which I think is the most important thing to show, that we're relatively consistent on raising issues that are appropriate. Okay.
Thank you, Joe.
All right, the third letter, which was placed in front of you today, is the comments on the draft Central Valley Flood Protection Plan.
This is the one dated April 25. It was on your desk when you arrived today.
Yeah. This is really significant in the long term. As you'll recall, we have a key responsibility in the Delta Reform Act to recommend priorities for state funding in the Delta. So that has a direct impact on what the Central Valley Flood Protection Board does. The board is in the process of evaluating this flood protection plan. The governor has recently appointed new members to the board, so he actually has his team in place. And so one of the key things we're going to need to do is to build a relationship with them. The chair and I met with one of the new members, and our expectation is we're going to need to go meet with the new chair of the board. I don't know whether the new chair has been appointed yet or not,
I don't think so.
My assumption is we're going to need to meet with that person, and we want to consider perhaps doing an agreement the way we have with BCDC about how we cooperate in working, because we have joint jurisdiction over several areas.
Pursuant to what Hank was raising at our last meeting on flood control and levee standards and so on, Don't we have an extra copy of Battling the Inland Sea kicking around, Hank? It's kind of the classic history of flood control in the Central Valley from the start of California. It is, and the names will be remembered. The fights are the same. The positions are the same over the decades. It's quite a marvelous book. We've got a spare copy somewhere, and we
will find a copy.
Yeah, good.
Okay. And the last letter that's referenced in the agenda, we don't have because we just ran out of time to get it done, but we will get it done in the next week. So it's a comment letter on the strategic plan for the Conservancy. So the others we felt had a higher urgency to them, but the Conservancy is an important issue, and we'll be bringing that back to you next month. And I think we've talked to them, and they understand the fact that we're late with our comments, but it just they only gave us, I think, 10 days to do comments on their plan. They gave us a very short timeline, just so we missed that deadline.
Okay. All right.